So in the morning, we're trained to see red light, red and near infrared light. And that's a very healing light. And I can tell you a lot about how it works and the mechanisms and what are the applications. But if we just think about sunlight, we see predominantly red and near infrared light at sunrise. And then as the sun rises in the sky, we start to get more of the shorter wavelengths of light. So that's blue and UV light, ultraviolet light. And that's kind of, we know that has an effect because if you're under UV light, you get a tan. It's very obvious that light's having an effect on our body, but it's also doing a lot of other things. And, as I said, we're really daytime mammals. So as mammals, blue light is a signal to our body to forage for food, to go and find a mate, to do all of those things that animals are doing in the middle of the day.
Do you want to wake up feeling like you're stepping into who you're meant to be, into the best possible version of you? What if I told you that the key to your best life, health, and happiness are all around you? You just have to find what works for you. I'm Hope Pedraza, and I believe that there isn't just one way to live a healthy and meaningful life, and that all you need is a little inspiration to make changes that last from the inside out. Each week, I'll be sharing tangible tips and inspirational interviews to help you on your journey. These are the steps to take to improve your life and live with purpose. This is Hopeful and Wholesome. Hey y'all, welcome back to the show. Today I have on the show Sarah Turner, and Sarah is the CEO and the head of science of Sarah Thrive, which is a neurotech company specializing in gut-brain connection. And they're all about red light is what they're working right now. And Sarah is super duper smart. She has a postgraduate degree in clinical neuroscience from Roehampton University in London. She has a Bachelor of Science in Psychological Sciences and Nutritional Medicine from Westminster. And she has spent years of her life researching and coming up with solutions to what she's working with her company, Sarah Thrive. And today we are talking all about red light therapy and the importance of light and red light in your life. She is a expert biohacker. In fact, she has a podcast that you can find my interview on her podcast with Rebel Scientists. But she has a podcast that she co-hosts with her co-host Russ. And this is her life's mission right now, is being on the cutting edge with these different experts. And this is what her company is all about. And she is so knowledgeable on red light therapy. And red light therapy is kind of like a bunch of other things right now, just kind of trending in terms of biohacking, right? We look at cold therapy and we look at infrared saunas and all of these other things. This is another one of those biohacking things that can really improve your life. And she's going to get deep into the science behind it, how it works, the importance of it, how it can optimize your health, how it can optimize your brain and the gut health connection, the gut brain connection. So much to dive into in red light therapy. And I really feel like this is going to be one of those episodes we're going to be like, okay, where do I get one? Because she has so much information, so much knowledge, and her company is doing such great work. So I'm excited to bring you all this and really give you the real science behind red light therapy and not just the trendy, all the biohackers are saying to use it. There's a lot of science behind it. And I'm excited to bring this to y'all. Let's jump in.
All right, y'all, let's jump in. I'm here with Sarah, and Sarah is an expert in a lot of things, but we are going to specifically hone in on some really important things she's an expert in, as she's the CEO of a company that kind of specializes in this. So I'm excited to bring you kind of this biohacking conversation, specifically talking about red light therapy. So thank you so much for joining me today, Sarah.
Thank you. It's great to be on the show. Thank you for having me.
Of course. So let's see. I feel like let's start with kind of the basics on red light therapy. Can you explain to the listeners? I know, like I told you before we started recording, I get a lot of questions on this. I have a few of my clients that use red light therapy, and I just get people asking me all the time. So can you just kind of explain in simple terms what exactly is red light therapy?
Sure. So red light therapy is kind of an umbrella term. And when people talk about red light therapy, they usually mean red and near infrared. And that's some wavelengths of light. It's a long wavelength of light, and it penetrates the body very well. So red light therapy is using specific wavelengths of light, and these are wavelengths of light that are found in sunlight. So it's something that our body is very used to, but we're targeting certain receptors in the body that absorb red and near infrared light. And then they turn the energy of the light into chemical energy that our body can use, as well as doing a lot of other things in the body. When we think about it, our bodies, we're kind of evolved to live under the sun. So it's not a surprise really that we can utilize certain frequencies of light.
Yeah.
I think what is interesting is just how much our body does with light. And actually now, people are starting to understand just quite how important it is, that the light that you put in your body.
Right. Yeah. I mean, we're hearing so many things. I feel like more and more we're hearing about the benefits of just sunlight, like
That's
many
right.
things in terms of benefits and how it affects our nervous system and all these other things, like from just the sun. So I guess what is the big difference between, like, I guess comparing it to the sunlight, right? We know that there's so many things that come from the sun, but what are kind of the differences or the extra benefits that you get from this red light versus like regular sunlight?
Yeah. So sunlight contains all frequencies of light. So sunlight, when you're exposed to sunlight, you're exposed to all different wavelengths of light. And wavelengths is just another way of saying color,
right?
Because the way that we perceive color is according to the wavelength. So sunlight contains all of the different wavelengths of light that you can get. And in the mornings and in the evenings, because of the angle of the sun on the earth, you get a lot of red and near infrared light. And that's why, it appears red. You see a nice red sunset and sunrise. So what we're doing with red light is we're just taking that specific portion of what you would normally get in sunlight. Because really our body is entrained to, we're diurnal mammals, we are creatures that are meant to be up in daytime.
Right.
So our bodies are kind of entrained to that natural rhythm of sunlight. So in the morning, we're entrained to see red light, red and near infrared light. And that's a very healing light. And I can tell you a lot about how it works and the mechanisms and what are the applications. But if we just think about sunlight, we see predominantly red and near infrared light at sunrise. And then as the sun rises in the sky, we start to get more of the shorter wavelengths of light. So that's blue and UV light, ultraviolet light. And that's kind of, we know that has an effect because if you're under UV light, you get a tan. It's very obvious that light's having an effect on our body. But it's also doing a lot of other things. And, as I said, we're really daytime mammals. So as mammals, blue light is a signal to our body to forage for food, to go and find a mate, to do all of those things that animals are doing in the middle of the day.
Right. Which is why they tell you to limit your blue light exposure when you're going to bed, right?
Of course, because if you're telling your body it's the middle of the day,
right?
What do animals do in the middle of the day? Okay, we go and look for carbohydrates. And what do you do if you're like looking at a blue screen all night? It's a similar thing. You start foraging in the fridge, if you like, and it correlates.
It's true.
Correlates to all kinds of things. They're now sort of correlating that mismatch of your circadian biology by using those light cues to things like obesity for that reason. And it's not just that you're kind of actively looking for food. Your body is, doing all different things at different times of day. And in the middle of the day, we're active. We want to be active.
Yeah.
So if you're looking at blue light of night, your body's getting active. It's producing different hormones. Your gut's doing different things. Bacteria are doing different things. So getting out of sync with your circadian biology by kind of mismatching those light cues is something that's becoming a problem. And that's right. Now, that's why they talk about blue light toxicity, because blue light becomes toxic if you're using it at these incorrect times of day.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes total sense. So, okay, this is also interesting. And it's interesting how, like you're talking about the different wavelengths do different things. Like there's a kind of a reason and a method for each of them, right? And they all have different uses and benefits and all of that. So you mentioned before you're going to kind of get into kind of the mechanism of how it all works. So you want to speak to a little bit of kind of the science around that piece?
Yes. So the body has to absorb light and do something with it, in order for it to have a biological effect.
Right.
And we instantly think that light sort of is absorbed by our eyes, right? And that is true. We do see the sunrise and we see sunset and we see the blue sky, but also our bodies are covered in light receptors. Right. So the main way actually that our body utilizes red light is it's absorbed into the body through the skin. And then it comes into contact with the cell. And inside the cell, there are tiny organelles called mitochondria. And, for people who are kind of, not so up with their biology, this is just like a long name for a small organelle that's found inside your cell that makes energy for the body. Maybe people remember from their biology classes, it's the powerhouse of the cell, the mitochondria. So this is the main light receptor for red and near infrared light. So your body is exposed to light, it shines on the mitochondria. There's a very specific enzyme within that mitochondria that receives that light, and it enables the body to produce more energy in the form of ATP, which is the energy molecule, the chemical molecule that your body uses.
Right.
In addition to that, it also helps to dilate the blood vessels around the area, so you get more oxygen coming in, more waste products going out. So you have this combined effect of more energy, greater blood flow, removal of waste products. And that's probably one of the main mechanisms for how red light has this very healing effect on the body.
Mm-hmm.
One of the main things that's documented about red light therapy is pain relief, also wound healing, all of these things where, the body is activating its innate healing response or its anti-inflammatory response.
Right.
A lot of this is probably happening because of that effect on the mitochondria.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Well, and the few clients that I have that use red light, that's why one of my clients has rheumatoid arthritis and one has non-specific connective tissue disorder, which is basically, a similar thing. But yeah, it's for the pain. It's for the pain and the inflammation. So, and then a couple other clients or another client uses it for these because she read about all the benefits for her thyroid. So yeah.
Yeah. It has a lot of medical benefits. And, and you talked about connective tissue disorder. People also use it from an aesthetic point of view because red light therapy also increases production of collagen and elastin and fibrinogen. So that's why you see a lot of companies make these masks, which is red light therapy, because in addition to having those healing effects on the body, it also helps with skin appearance.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because your structure, you're producing all of those molecules that help with the structure.
Right. That makes sense. With your company, do you have a lot of customers do you see this firsthand, like kind of before and after of them using, I guess it's just first right now, just speaking aesthetically, like people having before and afters, like before they use the red light therapy and then after that people actually seeing physical, tangible benefits from that?
Well, my company is a startup company. So at the moment, I'm just getting ready to launch my product.
Got it.
And it's going to be very specifically based on brain health. And that's something that I'll talk about in a bit of detail, because to me, that's the most interesting thing that's happening. But I do work with a lot of companies that do make a lot of these facial masks. And for sure, it does have an effect because it very much is working at that level. And this is when you need to know a little bit about the different kinds of light and what they do.
Right.
Because red light is slightly shorter in wavelengths to near infrared. So red light doesn't penetrate very deep into the body, but it does penetrate superficially into the skin.
Okay. So then if you're comparing it to like an infrared, the light in an infrared sauna, that's going to go deeper into the skin than the red light. Am I understanding that right?
You are understanding that right. The longer the wavelength, the deeper it penetrates. But there is a kind of level at which the energy that the body takes in becomes more heat than light.
Ah, gotcha.
So with the saunas, the way that they're having an effect on the body is that they're activating receptors in the body that respond to heat.
Okay.
So you don't necessarily want to do that. And especially with a brain device, we're not looking at that so much because you don't want to have something that's kind of focused on heating the brain.
Right.
I mean, saunas are great. I mean, I love saunas, but they are having a slightly different effect. Gotcha. So this is a very specific wavelength of like 600, which is red, up to about 1100 nanometers, which is near infrared. Once you get past that, the saunas, you're going a lot longer wavelength and then you're getting the heat energy.
Right. That makes sense. So then let's talk about the brain optimization piece, because that is really fascinating that we can use this for that's like a whole other level than like, well, let me get rid of some wrinkles. So let's talk about that.
Well, see, this to me is the most fascinating thing, because you would think that the brain is in the dark there. It's in the skull.
It's in there. Yeah.
It's in the skull. But actually, the skull is fairly transparent to these longer wavelengths of light, this kind of near infrared wavelengths. So not only is the brain receiving light signals directly, it's also producing light, which is a whole nother fascinating topic, because they've now discovered there's such a thing of biophotonic emission. So that's actually light that's emitted from tissue.
Oh, now that's crazy.
It's great. And it's so interesting, and when you start to look at this, you really have to kind of change your mindset on how you think things are working.
Right.
And certainly for me, I did a lot of study around neuroscience, and we weren't really taught this. This is something that I've had to learn separately from a lot of that academic training. But actually, when you start to think of the brain more from a physics point of view than chemistry, it makes a lot of sense. So actually the brain, because the brain takes a lot of energy to do what it's doing.
Right.
It's got a lot of these mitochondria there. So there's a lot of mitochondria to receive the light signal. If you can get a long wavelength of light, so you need, just red probably is not getting through to the brain. You need to have these longer wavelengths. So plus above 850 nanometers, then the brain actually starts to receive this light. Then the brain starts to get charged up. And not only does it have this effect of removal of waste products, greater blood flow, we also then start to see that these mitochondria can signal to the cell to kind of upregulate the mitochondria, produce more mitochondria, or send mitochondria to different places, or actually promote neurogenesis in the brain. So there's now some really fascinating research that's going on, looking at all different kinds of brain applications and how people with many different things, but mainly stemming from lack of energy in the brain or too much toxin or not enough sleep, are responding to red light therapy. So brain, or transcranial as it's called, which just means across, you're applying the light across the cranium, transcranial photobiomodulation. Again, this is another fancy word that just means light therapy, photo, light, biology, modulation, you're changing your biology, but people like to keep it technical.
Right, of course.
When they're talking the science.
Sounds fancy.
It sounds fancy, and that gives it makes it legitimate. But actually, there's a lot of research going on in Harvard, at Austin University, a lot of these big establishments really taking it very seriously, this effect of light on the brain.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
So what would be some of the kind of tangible benefits of that, of using this for brain optimization?
So from my point of view, I'm looking at people who are trying to take their brains from a baseline to better. So more like wellness, things like increased concentration, increased focus, improved memory. There's been some very interesting research done looking at, because the brain, not only can you shine light on the brain, you can also modulate that signal to kind of entrain your brain waves. So we now know, when we're talking together like this, our brains are probably emitting a wave of an alpha frequency. We're kind of in that alert state.
Right.
So people who have trouble getting into that state, people who have various brain disorders, you can pulse the light you're delivering at certain frequencies. And that also helps people to get into different brain states. So again, meditation is something that people find difficult. But if you use a very high pulsed frequency, we're now discovering that you can enable people to meditate better, to self-regulate better, to be in a calm state. So there's a lot of research that's being done on very specific brain disorders like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
Right.
The device I'm making, I'm looking more about people who just want to optimize the state that they're in.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, and all the things you just mentioned, those are, all this, the memory, the attention, brain fog, like all of these things are common symptoms with the clients that I work with, among other things. But those are some of, especially the brain fog. And I feel like, and especially over the past year, this is something, and I don't know if it's related to the pandemic or what, but I feel like more and more people are experiencing brain fog and are just living in a fog and having memory and concentration and all that. So even those, that's a huge deal, to be able to kind of even just get through those few things, much less, moving on to things like Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and other brain disorders. That's a huge shift for people. It's a huge shift.
And I think you're right. I think it is a big problem. And certainly there are people who have post-viral brain fog.
Right.
Certainly, it's now documented that a lot of people maybe post-COVID have some residual symptoms going on.
Right.
But also I think, things are stressful. It's almost like we've got a collective post-traumatic stress disorder.
It's exactly it. I was going to say that. It's like the PTSD from the pandemic. Yeah, totally.
So people are trying to kind of, even if you're not struggling post-viral, you're still trying to navigate your way in this world, which has changed. We're now, people are used to Zoom more. People are doing more things in isolation. We're having to make adjustments. So, I think brain fog is very, very common right now. Anxiety is very common. That kind of feeling of, that you're not quite catching up with things is common. So to have something where you can at least give your brain a bit of support.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
It's great. And the other thing that we now know is that you can support the brain by supporting other things. And I'm sure that you're a big fan of the gut-brain connection and how that works. Because now we understand that you can shine light into the brain and actually have an effect on gut bacteria.
That is crazy. So that's insane.
Well, when you think about it, mitochondria, which is, where we know that light is received by the body, are really maybe bacteria that were just taken in by a multicellular organism, millions of years ago.
I see.
That they have a similar structure to bacteria. And now we know they can even travel around the body fairly independently. So we shouldn't be too surprised that the bacteria also respond to light. What is interesting now, I think, is how important those gut bacteria are for something like your brain health.
Right.
If you've got dysbiosis in the gut, again, this is going to lead to things like the brain fog. And so what I do with my device is I also have a panel that goes over the gut so that you can shine light into both at the same time to kind of maximize that effect.
Yeah. That's amazing. So I had a guest on not too long ago, and she's an expert in kind of the gut-brain axis in terms of kids with autism and ADHD. And she basically healed her son from nonverbal. He's completely nonverbal autism with, healing the gut-brain axis. I would love to see research going that direction too, and working with kids and autism and those kind of neurological things because there is such a huge, and that's the whole episode was about, how it all starts in the gut. These issues that are happening with kids, it's all starting in the gut. I would feel like that would be such a huge research piece of putting that to kids too, and how that's affecting autism and behavioral disorders and that kind of thing, and being able to kind of heal the gut-brain connection with the light. That's amazing.
And actually in Australia, they are doing these studies. They're doing these studies with autistic spectrum disorder because it is having this effect. And also things like Parkinson's, because we now know that Parkinson's actually, they now think starts in the gut.
Right. Yep.
And you have damage probably to the gut barrier, a leaky gut. And then, this causes inflammation, and then that inflammation then has an effect. And, now they're saying leaky brain, it probably has an effect on the blood-brain barrier, which is in effect a leaky brain, so that you have this kind of, it's the causality is there in the gut, and then you get issues in the brain. So treating the gut for the brain is not new, but I think the interesting thing is, okay, can you do both at the same time and maximize the effect?
Right. Well, yeah. And it's almost the opposite, because usually we think of healing the gut to fix the brain, but now we're starting from the brain to the gut. That's amazing. I think that's so fascinating.
You can go both ways. It is very interesting because the gut and the brain are connected via lots of things that's happening, but also by a nerve. We have a vagus nerve that goes directly from the brain to the gut and actually all around the body. And we actually know now there are more signals going up from the gut to the brain than there are down.
Exactly.
So let's try, let's put light on the gut, let's put light on the brain and kind of balance that. And I think that's probably the way things are going. And like I say, Australia seems to be leading the way with this for some reason. There's a lot of studies. They invented the term photobiomics, which is how the gut flora react to light. And they're doing some brilliant studies where they're even doing stool samples before and after doing red light therapy and seeing a change in the composition of the bacteria.
That is amazing. That's amazing. I love that. Well, and I love the piece you said too about you're talking about people wanting to just kind of optimize, and the piece about just regulating themselves, because that's a huge piece in my world too, is just helping people. They're just running in such a chronically stressed state. It's just being able to regulate their nervous system. And you're talking about people who have trouble meditating and all of that. And that was going to be my question before you mentioned that, was okay, can this help us get into the right brainwave state for things like meditation and kind of these transcendental, experiences where we can really calm our body down. And I think that's a huge piece for people. It's, they're so wound up tight. They're so just, fight or flight all the time that they have trouble slowing down and calming down and being able to regulate their nervous system.
That's right. And I think something that I do myself is breathing exercises with light. Because, if you can sit and if you can actually modulate your breathing, but at the same time, you're giving your brain the light, so you've got more energy, so you can kind of process it more. You've got light across the gut. So you are stimulating the vagus nerve, which will help you to incorporate the learning from the breath work. I think it's all about kind of, in biohacking, they call stack your hacks.
Yeah, right. Putting it all together. Yeah.
Put it all together.
Yeah.
Because you're right, the whole self-regulation piece is important. You need to deal with it from the inside with your breathing, and then from the outside with what you're either putting in your body in the form of food or light or water or whatever you're doing. And I think that's something that people need to kind of get their head around, that light is almost like a nutrient.
Yeah.
It's another nutrient.
Yeah.
Or another supplement.
Right.
So, you know, people are very happy to kind of supplement with B vitamins to help with their nervous system, but you can also use light to, you know, support your body while you're doing your other kind of self-care regimes, you know, like breathing, like meditating, like taking time, like walking. I mean, the device I've got has even got a little battery pack, so you can go out and walk.
Oh, that's so cool. That's exactly what I was about to ask you. How, so the devices that you are, these are like wearable things. So you're wearing them on your head or your gut or whatever. Okay.
Yes. The one that I've developed is a wearable, but there are other things that people can use. You know, there are panels that you can put in your room, and then you just stand up and you get a certain amount of light, or you can have flexible pads. There's all different ways you can utilize light. I've just tried to make mine as convenient as possible.
Yeah.
But yeah, this is kind of a way of, it's almost mimicking sunlight. And obviously the best thing you can do is also see the sunrise, see the sunset, expose yourself to light in the day, do your breathing. So this is just one more tool that people can use. And I think the good thing about it is it's targeted, it's specific. You know, you're getting a certain amount of light in a certain amount of time. So you can almost build your body up to that exposure, because using red light is a bit like exercising. You know, the more you do it, the more adapted your body becomes. And it's almost like a hormetic response. You know, you give your body that little bit of stress in the form of light, like you do a little bit of exercise, and your body will respond by making more receptors.
Right.
So it's kind of getting people to incorporate these things into their life, along with a healthy
everything
lifestyle.
else. Yeah.
Along with
sure.
everything else.
Yeah. Right. So let me ask you this for people, because I'm thinking in my head, and because I've had a client before that kind of worked through this, of living in a place that was really dark and gloomy most of the year. So do you see that, and, you know, sunlight, people, they get sun lamps and that kind of thing, which I don't know. I think those can only help so much sometimes with people that have seasonal affective disorder. But do you see red light being a benefit for people like that, who maybe live in a climate where it's kind of dark and dingy a lot of the year and they don't get a lot of sunlight?
Like England, you mean?
That's right. Like your home.
Yes, I think certainly red light therapy is very useful for people who are living somewhere where they're not exposed to, you know, a lot of sunlight. It's not the same as those seasonal affective disorder lamps or SAD lamps, because you're not getting full spectrum, because they're giving you the full spectrum so that it's kind of very much mimicking the sun, and you're also getting that blue light. But actually, you know, even on the dingiest day, I mean, I'm here in England. Where are we? March, and it's been raining all day. Yeah. But you're still, you know, I still went out for a walk, even in the drizzle, because you're still getting some light.
Right.
But from the point of view of using it for wound healing, for pain, for brain health, for self-regulation, yes, I think it probably is especially useful for people who haven't got access to the sun. I mean, certainly for things like we spoke about, autistic spectrum disorder, you know, you might want to know that you're almost giving like a dose, you know, using light as almost like a medicine, so you can build it up. You know, it's just very convenient. And we do live in a time where we're not outside all the time. Even people who are living, you know, Mexico, Hawaii, you know, wherever people are living, you're still not outside all the time. But yeah, I think you're right. I think it is especially useful for people who don't have so much access to being outdoors generally, regardless of where you are.
Yeah. Well, and I love that you've made it so convenient, because I think that's the other thing with, you know, when you look at other companies who make red light therapy, they're just kind of big boxes of light, right? So I love that yours is the convenient. I mean, that's how I would rather do it, in a convenient way where I could do other things and not just have to stand there in front of the light for, you know, however long. So yeah, I think that makes it super convenient for people.
It's super convenient. And also the way that light works is, if you want to get like a consistent dose, which is what you want to do in order to kind of build it up,
Right.
You need to have the light fitting the body because light will only travel in a straight line. So if you're standing in front of a panel, you're losing a lot of the light because light, imagine it like little arrows coming at you. It's going to bounce, unless you get the angle right.
Right.
So I think there are devices you can get, where it curves around the body. And those ones are going to be better too from a dose point of view. And actually, the further you are away from the light has a massive effect because light will reflect and bounce and do all kinds of things, even if you're, very close to it. So these devices, they fit flush to the skin. So that's, again, something that you want to consider, if you're looking at getting a light device. Can it go flush to the skin? Does it curve around the body?
That makes total sense.
Yeah. So it depends whether you're just kind of using the light therapy device just to kind of charge your body a little bit or whether you want to get a specific dose. They're things to think about.
Yeah. Are there anything else? Because I was going to ask you that too, kind of when people are looking at, are there pros and cons to certain things? Is there anything else you look for besides something that's going to like fit to your body when you're looking at getting red light device or whatever?
Yeah, it depends what your goal is. So you kind of need to know what your goal is up front. Like I say, the panels are good if you just want to kind of give yourself a little bit more energy. If you've got a specific pain, if people have like bashed their elbows or knees, you can get pads that specifically fit around that area. And they're very good too. Like I say, the device I've designed is specifically for brain health, but it also has a pad for gut health. So it's kind of gut brain. But you want to make sure that it's one that has a certain amount of power output. Now, I know it's difficult to judge that, right? But most of the cheap ones that you're going to get on Amazon or something are going to be very low power.
That makes sense. Yeah.
And the other thing is they're going to be putting off maybe electromagnetic fields that you might not want. So you want one that's from a reputable company where, they've said that they've tested it and it's not producing any EMFs, electromagnetic fields. And 30 milliwatts per centimeter squared is kind of a good dose.
Okay.
So you want to make sure that yours is like 30 to 100 or something like that. So usually people quote the dose in milliwatts or the output in milliwatts, or they might say joules per centimeter squared. So that's like the energy, but that one is time dependent.
Right.
So you want to make sure you get a good dose, which is around about 30 joules per centimeter squared. So you can use maybe a higher or a lower power device. You just need to adjust your time.
Yeah.
But there is a limit. If the device is really underpowered, it doesn't matter how much you use it, you're not going to get an effect. If it's really a strong light, you want to make sure you don't use it too much because you can overdo these things.
Okay.
You can overdo it. And what happens is your body starts to work so efficiently that it produces a lot of waste products. And it gets to a certain point where the waste products are kind of more than the body can deal with.
Right. They can't get rid of them fast enough.
That's right. Then you have a drop-off effect. So, yeah, using like a good quality from a good company, low EMFs, a good dose, and then building up the exposure so that, you're not overloading the body. And then just kind of doing, 10 to 20 minutes, depending on the dosage, like 3 or 4 times a week.
Okay.
So you're not overexposing yourself. And then I think, people have some fabulous results from these devices and it's non-toxic. You're not putting anything into your body that your body's going to have to, your liver's going to have to deal with.
Break down. Right. Yeah, exactly. So for the wearable devices that you have, are these things you like charge up? Are they battery powered? Like, how does that work?
Yes, they're battery powered.
Battery powered. Okay.
Yeah, so these are just battery powered and you just use a normal USB charger and it charges them up. And then inside the batteries are all totally shielded. So you're not getting any EMF. You're not getting any, I'm looking around my room because I've got like lots of different gadgets. And some of them you plug into the mains, but then, you do get a little bit of leakage of electricity coming from the main supply. So, yeah, these ones are battery powered and they're shielded and you just charge them and they last.
Yeah, that's amazing. So how did you get into this realm? How did you get interested in red light? And I mean, you're all into like the biohacking queen.
That's
so how did you get into all of this?
Well, I started off my career many, many moons ago in pharmaceutical research. So I started off there and I was put on a special task force. I was actually looking at asthma inhalers, looking at how could we make the inhalers more efficient. And one of the things I discovered was that the effect of an asthma inhaler very much depends on the effect inside the body. So if you have a buildup of static charge inside the body, the drug is going to deposit at different areas of the lung and not necessarily where you want the drug to be. And so you need to take more drug. And then that started me thinking about, okay, this is very much dependent on the body. So, a very simple fix to that is grounding, which, when I first started talking about these things, it seemed very woo-woo. You're telling people to walk barefoot on the ground. Right. It sounds hippie-ish.
Right.
But that's one way that you can actually deal with excess charge in the body and change the way your body reacts to drugs, but also to pollutants, to all different things in the environment. So I kind of left the pharmaceutical industry and went on to study nutrition. I got a nutrition degree here in London. And then I went on to look more at the brain and studied clinical neuroscience. And that kind of led me, I moved to California actually for a little while.
Oh, nice.
And started, getting involved in the whole biohacking movement, because biohacking, although the names, people don't like the name of biohacking, but we're kind of stuck with it for now. But actually the concept of modifying your external and internal environment to kind of optimize your biology, I think it's great, and I think it's so cool that people are starting to look at that. And there are all different kinds of biohacking, but most people are just looking at, okay, how can we better adapt what we're doing to suit our biology?
Right.
Because, we have only relatively recently had electricity, 200 years out of 200,000 years of evolution.
Right.
And so we really need to make these hacks, they call them hacks. Okay, if we're not outside all day, we can utilize red light devices and have this great effect. We're indoors all day, we build up charge. Okay, you can very simply do 10 minutes of grounding every morning. So that was kind of my trajectory. I kind of was in the drug industry. I kind of saw, okay, I can see how you could increase the effect. I mean, I'm not anti-drug, don't get me wrong, but I think there are things you can do with your body which mitigate a lot of the effects of needing the drugs in the first place. It's just having an understanding of what you need to be doing. Grounding, good water, good food, low toxins, utilizing these light therapies. Just doing that alone can have a massive effect. And then, like you say, self-regulation, breathing. These are all things that we can do that for chronic illness, which is probably long-term, going to have a better effect than kind of being on some kind of drug treatment long-term.
Right.
So, I kind of got involved that way. And I've done a lot of other different things looking at the effect of our consciousness, focused intention, structured water. There's a lot of very interesting things that kind of go with that kind of alternative health biohacking mindset.
Yeah, I love it. Well, then it led you to, starting this company. And so what got you specifically into red light? What kind of piqued your interest there?
So I was working in California, and actually I was looking at structured water because the way that water acts in the body is, again, very interesting. And I did an interview with a guy called Jerry Pollock, who is a professor at University of Washington. And he was looking about how water changes when you shine light on it. So if you shine light on water, especially if it's next to what they call a hydrophilic surface, which is just like a water-loving surface, like a cell membrane, water actually changes its structure and becomes structured like ice is structured. So ice is a lattice, and that's why it's hard, because it's a lattice structure with bonds in between. When you shine light onto water, it also becomes structured, but without the bonds in between. So it becomes slippery. And so he kind of put forward this suggestion that this might be having an effect on your biology, because if you shine water on, our bodies are water. Actually, it's when you look at molecular weight of water, I think we're something like 99% water by molecules.
Right.
So, of course, light is going to have an effect on our body because light has this amazing effect on water. So that got me thinking, because initially I was looking at structured water products, and I worked for a company that actually made structured water, and we kind of set up our own company. We were going to do structured water because that's very fascinating. But I soon began to realize, okay, the body is doing it itself.
Right.
So how can we optimize the body to do that? And light was the thing that's having the biggest effect.
Yeah.
And I went to do it. I thought, I need to see this for myself. And I went to work for this guy who was looking at red light and Parkinson's disease. And so I volunteered and I said, I'll help you out with the data collection. And he was just putting this helmet on people with Parkinson's disease. Some was a sham, some was an active device. It became very obvious to me who was having the active treatment.
Wow.
Because although it's double blind, you don't know what's going on.
Yeah.
I could see half the group getting better. All of a sudden, and it wasn't always how you think, oh, they're going to be getting better. They're going to be so happy. And it wasn't like that at all, actually. They were getting more fed up, more angry, more agitated because they started to be able to do things that they couldn't do. And they'd been living for a long time in this kind of mode of Parkinson's where everything's done for you. Then all of a sudden, you can button up your own cardigan. You can get yourself to the car. You can, and for some people, that was an adjustment.
Right.
Getting better process was an adjustment, but they were definitely getting better. Things like reaction times. We were testing reaction times, standing up out of a chair, walking 30 meters. People were doing it without hesitating. People's reaction times were getting quicker. And then I thought, okay, I need to do this. But the device that we were using was this. It was a research device. It had all different fans on to get the power. It was heavy. People didn't like using it. And I thought, we need a lighter one. And my intention wasn't actually to start up a company. My intention was just to get a device that was lighter and that people could use.
Right.
But actually there wasn't one around. So I ended up taking it to this company that I'm now working with, a Dutch company that are now making this device. Yeah. And it's super cool because this one is lightweight. It's got the same power. You can kind of adjust the frequency a little easier. You can have a gut pad, which we didn't have in that trial. So we weren't looking at the effect of the gut. But that was definitely the moment where I thought, okay, this is something very interesting. If you can see this effect on people who've got this disease, which is meant to be progressive.
It's degenerative. Yeah. It's not going to get,
It's meant to only get worse. That's what's meant to happen.
Right.
And since then, I've spoken to a lot of researchers who've looked at people with these kind of progressive illnesses like Alzheimer's and found that people do get a certain relief of their symptoms.
Wow.
I mean, I'm not saying that about the device I've made because at the moment it's untested.
Yeah.
But certainly this is the research that's coming out. People are starting to see for all kinds of things. But the dementia thing is especially interesting because right now we don't have another solution for that.
Right. Yeah.
We have a lot of things you can do with your diet and with your circadian biology and these things, which again are only going to be positive, but there's no medication right now that's proving useful for those conditions.
Right, for sure. I love that. What a journey. Oh my gosh, you've learned so much. I feel like the amount of research that you've been a part of is just, it's crazy that to see the things that you've seen in the progression of research that you've seen over the years through all this, I think is just crazy. And it totally lines up with, the path that you're on now. It's very cool. So you said your company is a startup. So when will you be distributing your devices and stuff? So
it's going to be end of May, June.
Oh, nice.
We will be ready then for full production. Wow. So I've just been over to the facility to kind of see everything and everything's kind of on track. So
it's super exciting.
Yeah, it's great because of course we had a bit of an upheaval with COVID, I
through a wrench and things.
I know it did for everyone. So it's good to be at this point, where we're there and we're starting to look at, okay, we've got devices ready. People can start to receive these devices in June, I think.
That's so cool. It's very exciting. That's very cool. So I have one more question I want to ask you before we finish up. But before I do that, can you tell everybody where they can learn more about your company, everything you're doing, the devices and all that, everything that you do?
Certainly. Thank you. Yeah. So the company is called Sarah Thrive, which is CERA Thrive, Sarah Thrive. I had so many iterations of name that was kind of based around light and I couldn't have it. So I'm just going to call it Sarah. But it's kind of a play on like cerebellum.
Yes, cerebral, I love that. Well, and your name is Sarah. Yeah, exactly. It's so cute. I love it.
So it's sarahthrive.com. And then I have Instagram, which is Sarah Thrive. And then I also do a podcast, which is The Rebel Scientist, which I know you've graciously agreed to come on. So that would be super cool.
Yes,
be able to listen to you there.
Yes.
But yes, that's rebelscientist.com. And that's a weekly podcast, which is, I talk a lot about light, obviously, but I also interview a lot of people who are doing biohacking and all different things. I try to kind of cover all different things, some of the really odd things that people are doing and, some of the more conventional things.
Yeah. I love it. Perfect. Thank you. So all of that, of course, will be in the show notes. So I can go check out our website. And are you doing like pre-orders now? Like can people go ahead and order devices? Is that how it's working?
Yes, I'm taking pre-orders, so people can go on and do a pre-order, and we've actually got a code for you in your show. So if people want to put in Hopeful 10 at the end, then they get 10% off the pre-order. And it's quite a deal at the moment because we're doing a pre-order which is going to be like $999, which is significantly reduced from maybe the retail price in a few months' time. But also I'm going to be doing brain coaching with that just for the first 50 or so people that buy the device, to kind of make sure that we've got everything down, and to, like you're saying, a little bit of education about how people can maximize the effect by other things that they can be changing in their lifestyle.
Yeah, I love that. That's amazing. So y'all go check that, and such a gracious offer. Y'all go check that out and use the promo code. It's awesome. Thank you, Sarah. And the last question I want to ask you that I like to finish off with everyone is, what do you think is the most important thing you can do to live with purpose?
To live with purpose? Well, of course, I am a bit obsessed with health and brain health. So, I would say the first thing is to take care of your brain, because everything else will follow. Even finding your purpose, or you need to find a meaning in your life for sure. People need to find meaning. I think that's something that we all know about. But get your brain in a state where you can do that. If you look after your brain, I think it becomes obvious what people need to do, because your brain is on full power.
Right.
And everything becomes a lot easier when your brain is working well. So I think to live with purpose, take care with your brain, get good sleep, eat well, get rid of toxins, adapt your light environment. And I think things fall into place when you do that.
I love that. It's such a good answer. And I think it's one of those parts of the body where it's like, it's not like the sexy thing you want to talk about, because you can't see it, right? We're not looking at our brain. So it's like, I don't know. I feel like sometimes it just kind of, it's not something we typically focus on, I think, a lot. But I think, like you said, it's one of the most important. It's like talking about the mitochondria. I feel like the brain is, it's kind of the overseer of all the things going on in your body. So why wouldn't that be the first thing we think of, like, oh, I should take care of my brain first? So yeah, I totally agree with that. I love that.
Great. Cool. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. Thanks for sharing this and for sharing all of your insight and wisdom and educating all of us on this. I loved this topic so much. And I know your company is just going to blow it out of the water and offering this to the world and giving people this other method of really optimizing their health. So thank you for all that you're doing. Thanks for sharing your time with us.
You too. Thank you. It was a pleasure.
Thanks for listening to Hopeful and Wholesome, y'all. If you found value in this week's episode, please subscribe on iTunes or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a review to let me know what you thought. I love to know what you find useful in these episodes, so I know how I can provide the most value I can to my listeners. And if you have topics that you want to know more about, I'd love to hear those as well. So shoot me a message on Instagram, Facebook, or LinkedIn. It's @TheHopePedraza, or visit my website, hopefulandwholesome.com. Thanks, y'all.